The Erev Shabbos, Pashas Va'era, Beis Shvat. Tomorrow is Gimel Shvat, the famous Sikha that the Rebbe spoke, touching is. We are in Hilchos Shegagos, and we're going to deal with Perek Daled today, talk about that, which is the halachas of Bezdin that makes a mistake and they paskin something and Klal Yisrael follows their psak. So with certain conditions, Bezdin carries the responsibility, and those who follow their psak do not carry responsibility. What are those conditions? We're going to learn a little bit of it now. So first it starts off with a blanket statement. Halacha Aleph Bezdin sheshagagu v'hayru laker guf b'gufei atayra. Bezdin made a mistake, and they paskined to take out a very important a base of what's Torah, guf of gufei atayra, and everybody followed them. Also kalam apia Bezdin p'turim b'cholecha b'efem b'neisim chayim chatas kur. And the other ones is chayav v'chatas kur. Shenema v'nelam dava, but they call a goof. They took out the whole mitzvah. So it says clearly that you don't take out a whole mitzvah and be responsible. It has to be less than that. A whole goof for a mitzvah. Halacha Beis, he goes into explaining that. Maybe not explaining every part of it, but there's something he's explaining more than that, maybe. They'll only be chayiv if there remains in the mitzvah, and they take out part of the mitzvah. And a second condition, the dvarim she'einam v'farashim b'Torah. Can't be something that's clear in the Torah. Then, if they do it, those conditions, you Bezdin chayav b'karim v'eis not being p'tur. Then Bezdin takes responsibility, and he goes through a list of things of what would be considered levatel miktzis, lelaker, and what's levatel, and what's considered mefarashim b'Torah. So, and then he comes finally to what is considered qualifying for Bezdin to be chayiv and everybody else to be put. And here he ends up. Aval im ta'u v'hayru v'amru ha'moitzi mershus l'shusu chayiv. That ha'moitzi mershus l'shusu chayiv. But this is dealing more with something that's mefurish in the Torah shenamar al yetzish from kaimen. So that's considered mefurish. Aval hazayrik ha'moishit mutter. But parts of that halacha, there's a zayrik, somebody throws something, mishus l'shus, somebody passes over something, mishus l'shus. Or, and here goes the phrase that creates the issues of our discussion today. Oy she'akru of me'avos malachas, v'hoyru she'ena malach. Or they took one of the malachas in the Torah and they said, one malachas of Shabbos, they said, there's no malacha, Ketzira, there's no malacha, Trina, there's no malacha, Harisha, whatever it is that they are, one of them, Re'el. So it seems to be that when we're talking about, obviously, a malacha in itself is only a mixus of Shabbos. That's the rule that the Rambam's presenting. However, certain malachas are mefarashim b'Torah, and that's a problem because there's a halacha that it can't be something that even as a deikar made them because that's just a ignorance, and anybody should have picked that up. That's not considered a psak bezdin. That's a mistake in the finish. Okay, so the Gemara in Hayris, Avdalam and Beis, presents a shaila. Boy, Rabbi Yosef. If they say ein charisha b'Shabbos, mahu, what's the halacha? Mi amrinan kivin the kamaydu b'kula milser. They do agree in Shabbos, but kibitl, and therefore kibitl mixes a key mixes dummy. That's considered exactly the case we need. Shabbos okay, one malacha. Adil makivin the akaryin leila charisha. Kolika, they're taking out a whole malacha on Shabbos. Akira's guv dummy. The Gemara was a shaila. Rashi explains that this is not about davish and tzedekah made the bay. It is talking about mittel mixes and kiyum mixes. Did you fulfill? Did you eradicate a whole halacha or just one malacha? All right, and the Gemara mentions charisha. Obviously, so the Beersheva on Asar there says not only charisha, but charisha is the first of the malachas in the Minyan Lamed Tes. That's why he mentions it. Fed the Kesef Mishnah doesn't make sense. How does the Rambam take a shaila in the Gemara, a boyed loyev shita, which means it's a shaila that has not been resolved in the Gemara, and which means a suffix whether you should bring a carbon or not, and paskin that that doesn't mechuyev. You should have said lekula, which is the way you paskin when it comes to a shaila, but you leave a carbon not. That's what you paskin consistently in other places. So why here does he say you should bring a carbon? Zok the Kesef Mishnah, an interesting approach. He says, "The efshalit chayk." I can offer you a deich and say that they should make a t'nai and say we're bringing this carbon, but if it's not a carbon, we're not mechuyev to bring it. If we're potter, it's an adava, which is a chiddush pellet to say that the Rambam means that when he doesn't say that. If I can, if you look at the Lashon Rambam, it would seem that he's giving this as a prime example of bittul mixes and kiyum mixes. And then another explanation is the Gemara seems to be leaning towards this line of thinking if you go through the Gemara. So he didn't really think that it was a mightily interesting, just that. So again, obviously, the Kesef Mishnah knows what he's talking about when he says it's a deichik, and it is. Okay, so this needs beer. There's no question. It's a pella on the Rambam. It needs explanation. So there are a couple of very, very nice explanations that I've come across. And then I would like to suggest something based on some other points that the Rambam seems to hold regarding Malachas Shabbos B'chlal. So the Sefer Mitzvah Eson in Harius says that if you open up a Gemara Masechta Shabbos in the end of Perek Bamet Taimu, the Gemara discusses where you learn Malachas Shabbos. So the Gemara says you learn it out from the word malacha, malachte, that exists in the Torah, which are 39 times that it says. So he says, according to this Gemara, we can have a shaila that since every malacha has a word in the Torah representing it, so it's possible to ask a shaila. Is every malacha separate because it has its own word in the Torah representing it? So, or no, they're all one body of malacha. But according to the Man Omar, that you learn Avos Malachas from Shabbos, from Melechas HaMishkan, that it's all learned from Melechas HaMishkan. There's no shaila that one malacha is only one part of the body of malachas. How would you assume that it's what? A whole what? A whole part of the 39 malachas. That's all it is. So in the sugya there in Perek Bamet Taimna, the Gemara says that we learned it out from Melechus HaMishkan, and the Rambam Perish Mishnayos says that. So the Mitzvah says very nice that according to this, it's obvious that there is no mokum to even have a suffix that you're considered oike kol guf. So, in other words, the whole shaila in our Gemara is based on an opinion that the Rambam doesn't hold of anyway. It's a very, very nice svar. It's a beautiful svar. It's a chiddush dik svar again, like any other svar. It would be a chiddush anything you're going to say here. But the chiddush to say that just because there's the word malacha, which is a remez of 39 times the Torah mentions malacha, should give it its own mitzvahs, that it's considered akakolim. That's sigazah. It's a word to definitely reckon with. There's another sefer that moves already in a different direction, and that direction is closer to where we're going to talk about, but with a different twist of what he says, and we'll see what he says. He has a shaila, which is a very, very good shaila. What is the Issa Malacha? Why is there an Issa Malacha? Is it because you didn't keep Shvisa? You weren't resting, you weren't staying away from, you weren't experiencing the Shabbos Shvisa. And obviously that could really be done in many ways, but that you need a special type of malacha, a special type of way to destroy that Shvisa. You need therefore a certain type of malacha with all the halachas of what malacha means. Or no, malacha is awesome. So he wants to say that this is the shaila, if it's considered bittul mitzvahs, akir mitzvahs, or akir's gufan. If you say that Issa Malacha is because he wasn't Shabbos, well, the Shabbos, so what? He was only Shabbos in one thing. Having Malacha is one area of not being Shabbos. But if you say that doing a Malacha is also in Shabbos, so each Malacha is its own. In other words, is Malacha kololas the concept of Shvisa, or is each Malacha its own thing? And so that's the Shaila. And there you can ask a Shaila, is it, but they're all related to Shabbos, or do we look at the Malacha? So he wants to say that the Rambam holds that it's a din of Shvisa, which, by the way, I have proof that that's indicated in the Rambam, that that's the way he understands Shabbos. But that's his approach. So I think that approach has a lot of value. I'd like to take it a step further in saying what that could mean. You know, whether he means that or that's what it could mean. But I want to explain it with a little bit of an introduction. I have written about this in my previous sefer that I wrote, and regarding the mitzvah of Shvisa and Shabbos. The Rambam in Perek Aleph in Hilchos Shabbos, Halacha Aleph, writes, Shvisa b'shvim and Halacha mitzvah saseh, which is an interesting lashon. Being Shavis is a mitzvah saseh. And right after that, Halacha bittul mitzvah saseh. So one thing you see clearly from now, that the malacha has to do with the shvisa, and exactly what we talked about just before. And what's what shvisa is about. Noting that in Yom Tov he writes a little differently. There he seems to hold there's a kiyum mitzvah of shvisa. Here he seems to be more focused on the bittul mitzvah of shvisa. Now, this same Rambam, in Perek Chof Aleph, in Hilchos Shabbos, writes about the Isser of tishbais, even from other things, not malach. And he writes that there are many things that the Chachamim aser from Shvus, and he goes in, enumerates them, that the Shvi says even in things that are not malach. So what we see, and again, this is I don't want to go into all the details. There's a Ramban in Chumash that brings the medrash that we should have menucha on Shabbos, even from dvarim she'enim malacha. That idea of Shabbos is to be a yom without teirach. It shouldn't be teirach, it should be Shabbosin. And there's a ritva also that it should be a yom shel menucha in Rosh Hashanah. Ritva in Rosh Hashanah. And he says if you're all day involved in doing work, even tzarich echel, then it's not a yom menucha. So that's the ritva. He says that the etzem, a person would work all day. Let's say he would move his furniture around, all that. That would be a deraisa. However, if I do it a little bit, it will be under Rabbanan. That's what Rabbanan asks. Okay, so the Rambam learns all this from the same Tishbis. So perhaps we can suggest that, again, we require more time to go into all the details, that really Perek Aleph and Perek Chaf Aleph are all the same. Just a different aspect of the same thing. The Rambam agrees there's a Tishbis, there's an opinion of having a day of rest. But there's two ways to destroy a day of rest, to hurt the day of rest, and to take away from being rested or removed from the work of the day. One is by a constant teirach of being involved, working. And then that's in Perek Chaf Aleph. And then there's a new concept of how you take away the tishbais, is the melacha. Melacha doesn't allow you to be in a yom menucha. It's not a yom menucha. You do a malacha, you take away the yom menucha. And I said in Hilchas Yontiv, he writes mamish different. Kol hashavas melachas aveda be'echad mehem arei kayim mitzvahs asay. He doesn't talk about the mitzvah mitzvahs. Because there's a different din. What's the difference? Just to note, and again, I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but that on Yontiv, on Shabbos, they both have the Lashon Shabbos, right? But wherever it says in the Torah, L'gabe Shabbos, the Lashon Shabbos, it says also Melacha, Kol Melacha L'Sasa. Also has the word Kodesh. And it's obvious from the psukim that there's a connection to that. It takes away from its what it is. Shabbos and Shabbos and Kodesh. Except by Yantam, generally that's not what it says. Generally it just says Shabbos and Zichron Shur. Shabbos. There it says Kodesh with a hefsek. But most of the time by Yantam it just says Shabbos by itself. And also by Shabbos, every time it says Shabbos, and it's followed by Kol Malach Leisas, or the Einish of Malach. Yom Tov, it just says Shabbos by itself. So that could be where the Rambam saw it as a mitzvah for itself, and here is a mitzvah of the Shabbos and being the Malach Shabbos, that you should have Menucha. So that's why he says that it's a different than Shabbos. That's what Shabbos is. And that's the meaning of Kodesh. We know that Kodesh is separation. So he understood that to be what Shabbos is. Oh. So based on this approach, what happens when you do Malach? Malach is that there is a Metzias of Shabbos, a Yom Menucha. And you have something that disturbs that Yom Menucha. So That's all what doing malach is, taking away their menucha. It's not the focus on the malach b'chlal. The malach is nothing more than a means to an end. Therefore, if you take away and say that a malacha is not a malacha, all you have said is that it doesn't disturb the Shabbos. Basically, that's what you're saying. It's not free. It doesn't disturb the Yom Menucha. So that means it's obvious what we're saying is that there's a Yom Menucha, and I'm not, and this doesn't stand in its way. So it's not shaykh to be considered Eiker Guf Halacha. Because the whole union of Malacha is that it's a chelik from a Guf. Otherwise, there's no thing in Malacha. Not the part is because it's part of Shabbos. Because everything is part of a deserve, part of whatever it is. It's because the whole idea of Malacha is that I'm taking away from the Guf. I'm being Eiker from the Guf, not the Guf. Because if there's no Guf, there's no Malacha. Not there's no Malacha because there's no, without Shabbos, no, because the whole idea of Malacha is that I'm mafriya the Guf. And I'm disturbing the menucha, the Yom Menucha of Shabbos. So it's also not interesting that the Rambam writes in an interesting lush in Halacha Beis. He writes, "Avalim tol oisha akru of me'avos malacha, v'hoyru she'enim malacha." Okay, it's a double lush. What is this double lush? She'akru of me'avos malachas. Well, obviously they were oiked. What else did they do? Right? V'hoyru she'enim malacha. How else are you going to be oiked? Right? By saying it is a malacha. They should have said she'akru of me'avos malachas. Terence says he's trying to stress, maybe, what we're saying. That all they're able to say is that this doesn't disturb the Yom Menucha. Ain't a malach. It's not a malach to disturb the Yom Menucha. That's why he stresses it, to bring out that that's what akru of malachas. Because there is no such thing as of malach on its own. The whole idea of a malach is that it's a chelik from the idea of being oiker, this bigger inyan of Yom Menucha. Therefore, it's always considered levatel mitzvahs or lekayim mitzvahs. The only other issue with Bill of Malachas is if it's before Ishva Krah. That's a different story. That Rashi and says that's how we're talking about it. So what the Rambam would hold, being based on what he says in other places, it will fit that he wasn't Geiris in this Indian, the Shaila of Rabbi Yosef, and held that the Shaila of Rabbi Yosef was only if you learn differently than of Malach and Shabbos. A good Ner Shabbos, Hatzlacha Rabbim, and have a great week. Zaygus and Tishtag.